Hello, everybody. Welcome to our weekly Q&A. I see some people jumping in here, which is great. We'll give it a minute or two more just to let anybody else who's going to join us. See Brian. Brian, welcome. Thanks for coming. And Devin, nice to have you on here. If this is your first time, my name is Jasper Blake. I'm the head coach here at the Endurance Space. Jason, welcome. Thanks for jumping in. Just as some housekeeping items, all of these sessions are recorded. So if you do have an interest in following up or reviewing some of the question and answer sessions, even if you weren't here on some of them, we record all of them and they're available at the My Endurance Hub space. So you can go and check those out. Lots of good info in previous episodes. The cool thing about anything really, sport in particular, is that if somebody else asks a question, usually other people have the same question, and if you ask a question, chances are somebody else will have the same question, or they might just find some new insight in the answers that we give. So encourage you to go back and review some of the stuff we have in there, previous Q&As, but also look at all the other great content. We have daily endurance moments, which are kind of 1 to 3 minute little videos, little tips, little golden nuggets that'll help you with all this endurance training. We have a discussion board, so if you ever have questions, certainly pop them in there, and it's usually me answering, but we do have other experts that pop in there as well to give you some feedback. And then we have master classes in there. There's so much great stuff, a whole bunch of webinars, everything you can possibly imagine about endurance sports and training and racing is all in there. So make sure you pop in there and check everything out. Looks like we got a few people here, so this is great. Let's get rolling. If you do have a question, the easiest thing to do is to put in the chat function. So you see at the bottom of your screen there's a little kind of chat bubble. If you click on that, it'll show the chat, and I'll take the questions in the order that they come. You can also do the raise your hand function. I always say this, I don't know if I'll actually catch it if anybody uses that. So better to just put it in the chat just in case I don't want to miss you. So looks like we have some people here, so I'll go into the chat now. And Jason says hello. Thanks, Jason. Devin also gives a little hand wave, which is great. And it looks like we have our first question, which is awesome, from Jason. Is it better to practice swimming in the pool, lake, or ocean? I love this question, Jason, because I think a lot of people have the same one. Like many of my answers, there's not one definite answer, so I'm going to give you a whole bunch. Most of your swimming, if you're getting into triathlon, will take place in a pool. There's a few reasons for this. The first is safety. Obviously, it's much easier to pool. There's usually lifeguards. It's in a contained environment, so if anything happens, you're in a much safer place. I always highlight the safety aspect of it. So most swim sessions, if you join a master's group or if you're getting ready even for an open water triathlon, which most of them are, you're going to spend most of the time in a swimming pool, and that's okay. You can develop really great stroke technique there. You can work on all the different energy systems in the pool. The pool really is the go-to place for swimming. However, the swim events or triathlon events take place in open water by and large. There are some events that use a pool, but it's quite rare. And that's because, you might have 200, 300, 400 people. That's very hard to manage in a pool setting. Whereas in an open water, everybody just gets in there and swims the course. So what I would recommend in terms of, splitting your time, let's say, between swimming in a pool, lake, or ocean, first and foremost, it's going to be seasonal. So if you live in any climate where there's a winter, quite often the open water options will not be available to you most of the year. Now, obviously, there's lots of places in the world where you can swim open water all year round, which is great. But even if you live in those environments, you'll find, the top triathletes are spending a huge amount of time in the pool, even if they live in a climate that allows them to swim open water all the time. when you're getting close to a race, and by close, I mean probably in that 10 to 12 week window leading into the race, if open water is available to you, and if you can do it safely, and by that I mean with other people, make sure you're with a group or at least a partner, or maybe you don't have anybody, but you have a friend or a spouse that can jump on a paddleboard or a kayak or a canoe with you to make sure it's safe, then I would highly encourage that at least one of your swims each week is in the open water, because you want to get used to what you're going to have to do in the race. And it is different. It does feel different in the open water. Now, water's water. So, the water itself isn't really changing. But what is changing is, in a pool, every 25 or 50 meters or 25 yards, or in the US, you're getting a little break because you have to make a turn at the wall. And that's different. You have to get used to swimming continuously when you do a triathlon event. The other big difference is, of course, that we often wear wetsuits in the open water, and that feels differently. So your shoulders need to kind of adapt to what it's like to be in a wetsuit. Sometimes wetsuits can feel a little bit restrictive initially. And so your shoulders have to get used to that. You kind of have to break the suit in a little bit. You have to figure out how you're going to put the suit on so that it minimizes any restriction in the shoulders. But the other thing is, a wetsuit holds your body in a much different position, much more favorable for most people. Really, really high caliber swimmers sometimes don't like how a wetsuit feels because their body position's already good. It's already kind of up higher in the water. And so they throw a wetsuit on and it's even more exaggerated, which can feel a bit strange. But most beginner, intermediate swimmers, their body position isn't awesome. So they put a wetsuit on. There's some buoyancy there with the neoprene, puts your body up in a nice, more favorable position, and you might even feel better in a wetsuit. Generally, people will move much faster in a wetsuit. A few reasons for that. One is it's very hydrodynamic. So just like aerodynamics on a bike, a wetsuit is very clean through the water. It's very contained. There's no baggy material from your shorts. It's a very fast material, and you're in a really good position, so you'll move a bit quicker. So again, most of the time you're going to be spending in the pool. That's for safety, convenience, temperature, climate, all those things. But when you get close to a race, certainly at least once a week, maybe even a couple times a week, to get in the open water and do some training sets there will really, really help when you do an actual triathlon. So thanks for that question, Jason. Devin says, what are your thoughts on using gels in a race? I don't love the texture, but I feel like it has the energy I need. Are there other products you'd recommend? Such a great question, Devin. So this kind of goes back to some of the other Q&As. I know nutrition comes up a lot for people because they don't really know what to do. And so let's revisit some of the main things to consider with nutrition. First is, if your race is an hour or shorter, so you may be doing a sprint race that's maybe an hour 10, or even a little bit longer, you can almost get away with no nutrition. Our bodies have about 60 to 90 minutes of stored muscle glycogen, which means we have the carbohydrate available to us up to that amount of time, provided you're not going into the race completely depleted. And so, if the race is fairly short, you don't have to be overly concerned with nutrition. But, for most beginner, intermediate triathletes, even some advanced, the Olympic distance, or certainly a half and definitely a full, definitely a half as well, we're getting up into the 2+ hour range. For halves, we're in the 4+ hour range. For fulls, we're in the 8+ hour range. Nutrition is absolutely critical. What you need to focus on is getting carbohydrate into your system. We have enough fat stored on our bodies to last us 10 Ironman races. I mean, we have enough energy in fat reserves on our body. Even if you're a very lean athlete, we have a lot. The limiter is our carbohydrate reserves. And as I said, we have about 60 to 90 minutes of that stored muscle glycogen. As intensity goes up, we use it more quickly. But even in an Ironman distance where the intensity is quite low, we're still utilizing carbohydrate as one of our fuel sources. So we need to get carbohydrate from somewhere. And so, of course, these energy companies, the energy nutrition space, have developed these products, and one of them is a gel. But there are other products. You're also going to get carbohydrate through the drink that you're using. That will most always have carbohydrate, unless you've mistakenly purchased a weightlifting product that's like pure protein, which some of them are. You have to be a little careful on that one. But any kind of hydration product, as long as it's not one that's just focused on electrolytes, typically will have carbohydrate in the mix. And so that's one way you can get carbohydrate, through the fluid. The other is gels. Now, to be specific about your question, I don't love the texture of gels. Well, yeah, some people don't. Some people find it just quite overwhelming to put a gel in their mouth. It's maybe like super sweet. They don't really like that. So first, I'd encourage you to maybe try some different gel products, because there's lots of different options available. So there may be some that are more favorable for you, that your palate likes better. But if it's the texture, like the actual feel of a gel in your mouth, some people don't like that. There are other products. One of, I think, the best ones are these things called blocks. So, a few different companies, they make kind of in between, we have liquid, which is sort of the most liquid. And then we have a gel, which is like kind of like a liquid, but a little more solid. And then we have these things called blocks. They're almost like a gummy bear. That's the best way to describe them. And they're a really great alternative if you don't like the feeling of a gel. The other thing I like about these block products, I'm using block, I think that's actually Cliff, they're Cliff blocks, but other companies will call them something different. And they're more like a gummy bear. What I like about those is it's a very defined amount of carbohydrate in each block. Whereas in a gel, you're going to have a package, and in the whole package, it might be like 25 grams of carbohydrate. But when you take a little bit of that gel, you're never quite sure how much you're actually getting. Whereas if you use these little gummy bear type things, you know exactly how much is in each, because they will tell you on the packaging. So I would try that as your next alternative. Or these, again, if you go to any local, retailer, that even in the running or biking space, they usually will have a variety of these products. Certainly ordering online is always an option. But I would try some of those products. And then failing that, you can go right to solid food. So energy bars, you have to be a little careful with, because, sometimes they have more fat and protein, which is okay. But really the thing we need the most for most races is carbohydrate. So you don't want to get like kind of a meal replacement bar. Maybe for the really long stuff is okay, just to satiate your hunger. But if they're a little too high in the fat and protein department, it's a little harder to digest when your body is at effort. So you stick to the products that are designated as during an event. And again, there's lots of different companies that make great products. So start with fluids. If you don't like gels, go to those gummy bear type things. If you don't like that, you can go more to solid food, and that's all good as well. Yeah, I hope that helped. Are there other products you'd recommend? Well, yeah, I think I just gave a list, so that's great. Brian says, yesterday I finished my second sprint triathlon, and we did an open water swim, which was super fun. Are there any strategies for how to do better in open water and not drown or get hit in the face? First of all, Brian, congrats. That's awesome. Good for you. That must have felt really, really great. Yeah, very exciting to finish a triathlon. It sounds like you're fairly new to the sport, so I hope you had a really great experience. And then, are there any strategies for doing better in open water and not drowning? I love that question, because first and foremost, our highest priority when we get in the water is to not drown. So I hope that you always keep that as the highest priority, or to get hit in the face. So I think maybe what you're getting at is, how do you manage, all of a sudden you're in open water and you've got, at a swimming pool, maybe we have one or two people in a lane and it's quite controlled. Whereas in open water, maybe they starting like 40, 50 or more people at once, or even 10 people, or even you're just in a bunch with 2 or 3 people. And all of a sudden there's a lot more going on. I'll take a guess at that's what you're indicating. And so first, know that a little bit of contact in the water when you're doing open water is in a race with lots of other people is totally normal. It doesn't give you license to then just start going and punching people and being really aggressive, because that doesn't help anybody. It actually slows you down too, and it's very poor sportsmanship. So don't be that person. But know that if there is a bit of contact, that's okay and it's normal. I mean, you have all these people trying to occupy a similar space, so it's somewhat inevitable. How do you get better at it? Well, first you practice it. So if there's a group in your community that's available to you, that would be the first step. Maybe a lot of times through the summer months, there are groups that will meet at various, open water options for you. And I would highly encourage going and swimming with a group more frequently, because it'll put you in that situation more and more. So you'll just learn by being in that situation. And, getting hit in the face and stuff, it's avoidable. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but it's also avoidable when you get a little more comfortable and maybe know where to position yourself in relation to other athletes. I think beginners, maybe even some intermediates, initially in open water, the face is in, and it's very intimidating. There's lots of splashing. It maybe sounds a little different in the open water, and you're trying to find the buoys and you're looking all over the place. And, we kind of get this tunnel vision where we're not really aware. But as you get more and more comfortable in there, you'll get more aware of where people are in relation to you. You'll be more aware of how to swim a little straighter and find the buoys and, sight in different ways. So that will all help. So the best advice I can give you is to practice it more, but practice it more with other people, because that's more realistic to what you're going to face in a race. And, we can also practice some of these things in a pool. So if you're with a group and you have designated lanes where you can do this safely and not annoy the other customers of the pool, if you're with their masters group, sometimes, we can line 3 or 4 people up in one of those lanes side by side, and you can learn swimming in close quarters with them, which will also help a little bit. One strategy I like to give to beginners for sure is, if they're really uncomfortable in that open water situation, don't put yourself in the middle of that group of people. I mean, that doesn't make any sense, right? Like, if you're already a little anxious and a little uncomfortable with multiple people being around you when you're swimming, like, start on the side. If you start on the side, you always have some clear water over to the side that you started on. But if you position yourself right in the middle and throw yourself right in the mix, well, there's going to be some contact. And if you think that that's really going to throw you for a loop and make you more anxious and, make you feel a little panicked, then start on the sides. There in open water swims, you can start generally wherever you want within certain parameters. So positioning yourself is key. If you are a slower swimmer, likewise, don't position yourself at the front of the race, because you'll have all these faster swimmers swimming over top of you, and that won't feel great either. So seed yourself accordingly. I know at the Ironman events now, it's usually a rolling start, and you're basically seeding yourself in the place that you think that you should be. And that has allowed, I think, the race to spread out a little bit more, a little bit safer, making it a little less anxious for people. So seeding yourself is really, really important as well. Yeah, thanks for that question, Brian. Just get it in practice. Find a group, get it in practice as much as you can. It'll make a really big difference. Jason says, before training and competition, do you eat the same foods or do you switch it up? That's a great question. Yeah, eat the same stuff. Find out what works for you, and then don't change it on race day. One of the biggest mistakes people make on race day is that they panic a little bit and they change what they've been doing, in training. So I used to have at least one session a week that was a really key session, especially for the long distance races. And I would make them little dress rehearsals. And by that, I mean, I would try and get up at a similar time, maybe not 3 or 4 in the morning. I know some of those races are early, but I would get up and I would have the breakfast that I was going to have on race day. It was always very simple for me. A bagel with some kind of nut butter and maybe some banana, maybe a bit of oatmeal with, some banana, carbohydrate focused meal, but with a little bit of protein, a little bit of fat, so I feel satiated before I start that big day. And the timing of it's really important as well. So, for me, I was good with sort of 90 minutes to 2 hours before having a meal like that, and then kind of light snacking up to the start of the race. Some people want to consume a little bit more, so they'll be 2 or 3 hours out. They'll have that last bigger meal. I know for me, if I had anything that was really savory, so, even 3 hours out, I couldn't have like a big, heavy, meal that stayed with me too long. But if I ate that bagel, peanut butter, or something that I found very easy to digest, it was no problem. And so I would do that in training. And then on race day, I knew that, I would eat the same thing. And I knew that my gut was going to be fine with it. And it made me feel like I'd had something to eat, but I wasn't really full. You kind of want to be there. I'll say that again. You want to feel like your hunger is satiated, but you're not full and kind of, I ate too much. So definitely like practice what you're going to eat for sure and keep it simple. I'll just say one more thing about Jason's question there. That applied to races where I was traveling as well. So one of the challenges when you go to other countries is maybe you can't find the exact things that you wanted to eat. And so I would just take, if there was stuff I thought that I couldn't find, I would take it. Now, if it was a country that I knew I could basically get the same stuff. So Switzerland, for example, I raced there a bunch of times. I knew I could get bread in Switzerland, bagel type stuff. And it was probably even going to be better than what I had here. And I knew I could get nut butter there, and I knew I could get bananas there. And so that was no problem. One of the more challenging places, I remember I did a race in Japan, and we were in a very small community, not a big city. And I didn't bring anything, and I couldn't really find what I needed. And the breakfasts they had available at the hotel were very different than what we would have. Probably very healthy if I was used to it, but it was more things like rice and eggs, I think. And I struggled a little bit because I didn't have, my staple stuff. And so that was a situation where going to a different country posed some challenges for me. And then in the future, I knew that I just needed to bring some stuff that was more of a guarantee for me. So yeah, good question. Brian says, at the end of the race, they were handing out potato chips and pizza. What are the foods we should be eating for recovery after an event? So we've had this question before. What are the foods you should be eating and what are the foods you want to eat are two different things. The reason they have chips and pizza is because usually people crave salt and fat at the end of those races. And for good reason. You've usually been consuming a bunch of carbohydrate in the form of gels or sugary drinks. And so your palate may not be into that. But really, if you want to get down to the nuts and bolts of it, the most important thing to consume post-race is to replace fluids and electrolytes and carbohydrate, because those are the things that you lose the most of. And then to have some kind of a meal replacement. And so, when I was really like in the heat of professional racing, we always made sure we had some kind of a recovery shake it was water-based and then had carbohydrate and electrolytes and then also some good protein and a little bit of fat. So it was more like a meal replacement. That was the go-to. And because your body kind of needs everything, you've just expended all this energy and it's hungry for good nutrition. So having good nutrition is really, really important. Now, so that's what you should have. What most people want are things like burgers and fries and pizza and chips. And so, I'm kind of, I'm mixed on it. I think both are okay because look, part of it too is I've just done this huge effort and I'm in a bit of a celebration mode as well. And maybe having a piece of pizza or some chips tastes really good in that moment. It's salty, it's a little bit fatty, and, it's just kind of comfort food in a way. And is it going to be the ultimate thing to put in your body after a big effort? No, not really. Is it the first thing you should put in your body after a big effort? No, not really. But is it available at the finish line and you've just done this big effort and it's like food that tastes really good in that moment, yeah, so go for it. But just make sure that you're also replacing the carbohydrate that you need and the fluids that you need as well, maybe as well as those things. So if you did have a recovery shake on hand, put that back first so you get what you need. And then, yeah, indulge a little bit. I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. Great question. Love. My two, honestly, post Ironman, come through the finish, and I usually didn't feel like much in that moment because I was feeling, pretty spent and awful. But eventually, I'd make my way to A&W, a huge burger and fries, and boy, did it ever taste good. Brian says exactly, must survive the swim and not drown. I think that's back to Brian's previous question about managing all the other people, in a swim. Jason says, I've had issues cramping in the past. Is there anything you can do to avoid cramping? Also, if your leg does cramp while running, is it better to play through the pain and hope it stops, or take a break, see if it settles? Okay, so there's a misconception, I think, that cramping is always caused by electrolyte imbalance or, fluid loss, like from being dehydrated. And certainly, yes, of course, this is one way that we can experience cramping. But often cramping comes from an overexertion of that specific muscle. We're asking more of it than it's capable of giving us. And so sometimes people will get cramping in races because they just went too hard. So if your training hasn't put you in a position to actually exert the muscles in that way, they will cramp. They're like overexerted. Like, what's a good example? Maybe you go to the weight room and just start doing a whole bunch of bicep curls, and you haven't done bicep curls in a while. Eventually that muscle will react and not like what you're doing to it, and it might cramp. So often cramps are that, like if you look at kids, always get cramps in the diaphragm. So if kids are doing a running event, or they're running around somewhere, sometimes they'll get a cramp, and that's because that diaphragm muscle, they're asking more of it than it's trained to do. When I was younger, I always used to get cramps in that diaphragm area because I hadn't built up the musculature in there. But then I'd go for these crazy hard runs and wonder why I was cramping. But over time, I hardly ever cramped in that area because I spent so much time like working on that muscle. So the first is to pace yourself properly and not put yourself in a position where you're overexerting certain muscle groups, beyond their capacity in that moment. So with training, that should ease a little bit. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, yes, of course, hydration, electrolyte imbalance, that becomes a factor, but really only as we get, longer. So if you're cramping in the first 10 minutes of something, it's likely not electrolyte imbalance or sodium deficiency. It's likely that you're overexerting that muscle. But if you're starting to cramp, 5, 6, 7 hours into something, then yeah, that's probably the case. So making sure your sodium levels are up. So that's part of the nutrition strategy of any long event, is to make sure you're taking in enough electrolytes, sodium in particular, and we have numbers for that. So in Ironman, it becomes really important that you are taking in enough of that. And the question is, if the leg does cramp while running, is it better to play through the pain and hope it stops, or take a break and see if it settles? I gotta be honest with you. When you get really bad leg cramps, there may not be a choice to continue running through it. Like usually when a muscle goes, especially if it's a big one, like your hamstring or your quad or your calf, you're not going to run through that. Like people really usually need to stop and work that thing out. So that might be your answer there. I mean, and the other thing is, it depends where you're at in the race and what the goal of the race is. So if you're starting to cramp and you've got 100 meters to go, well, maybe you tough that one out and get to the finish. But if you're in an Ironman and you're halfway through the run and your hamstring's starting to cramp, you might need to walk a little bit and make sure you take in some sodium, see if you can get that area to settle down. So it really depends on what the situation is, for sure. Devin says, every athlete has different advantages and disadvantages genetically. What do you feel like was your advantage and disadvantage? Yeah, this is the neat thing about sport. And one of the things I really love and appreciate about sport is, sports have athletes of all different shapes and sizes. And, people will find their place in many different sports. So, I'm a smaller guy. I'm 5'5". When I was racing, I was anywhere from about 125 to 130 pounds. So I was smaller. So in a sport like swimming, the top Olympic swimmers are generally quite tall and big. They have lots of leverage. So size certainly in some aspects was a disadvantage for me on the bike. Maybe a little bit too. The leverage I could get through my legs. If you know anything about leverage, was not as great as maybe taller athletes. So some disadvantages there. But then I also had huge advantages with my size because, with running, for example, I was smaller and I could turn my legs over really fast. And, so you get into an Ironman and yeah, I might have a deficit after the swim and the bike, but I sure could run. And that was a huge advantage. And in something like Ironman, where if you start to fall apart in the run, time comes back to you real quick. So I'd sometimes have 10, 15-minute deficits off the bike. And by the end of the marathon, I would catch those people. So, and then likewise, the same athlete might be a bigger athlete. Maybe they're 6'2" and really big and strong and amazing swim bikers, but now on the run, they have to carry all that with them. And so then that's a disadvantage for them. So, those were, in terms of pure physicality, the size, the body that I've been given had some disadvantages, and it also had some remarkable advantages. One of the biggest advantages I had was VO2 max. So, for my size, I was able to move or utilize a lot of oxygen, and that served me very well in a variety of sports. I could climb hills really well, whether it was running or biking. I could sustain a very high effort for a very long time, which was a massive advantage. And so, yeah, it's kind of neat. I love sport that way. I love triathlon too. Is kind of neat because, and cycling, I'll say too, if you ever watch the Tour de France, there's, 8 or 10 athletes per team. I can't remember how many, but in that team, there's just such a massive variety of body shapes and sizes. You've got the big diesel engine, the athletes that are there to kind of help protect the smaller climbers, for example. And so, they can produce a lot of wattage for a long time and kind of sit on the front of a group and, bring back one of their climbers or lead out a sprinter, for example. Then you have the climbers who are, generally in that 5'7" to 5'9" range, and they're really, really wiry, very slight individuals. So they can go uphill really fast, but they might not be able to generate a ton of overall power. But can they ever climb? And then you have the sprinters who are, maybe not super tall, but can they ever produce power? Like really, really big legs that can generate a lot of power. And you set them up for a sprint and they can produce 1,800, 2,000 watts and they can win that way. So triathlon's kind of the same, right? You have, swim bikers that maybe are a little bit bigger athletes. You've got runners who are a little bit smaller, and it's really neat. I think that's one of the coolest parts about triathlon in particular, but certain sports too, you'll find different shapes and sizes within the same sport, all with different strengths, which I think is really, really cool. So great question. Thanks, Evan. Brian says, I recently completed a gait analysis and learned that I need to run by pushing more. What are some other simple running tips to help me go faster and avoid injuries? Yeah, this is great. I think anytime we can utilize, expertise of somebody in that space, so gait analysis is really cool. I'm not entirely sure what you mean by pushing more, but I'm sure the explanation makes sense. The thing I think about running, there's a few really easy cues that you can have, technical cues that are helpful. And so one of them is stand tall and proud. So you want to support your body weight with your skeleton, not your muscles. So just by having good posture and being kind of, more vertical rather than kind of hunched over or leaning back or whatever, you'll utilize your skeleton to carry your body weight, which is great. Landing with your foot under your center of mass, or sometimes we can land like kind of mid to forefoot is helpful as well. We want to have a slight forward lean from the ankles. So not from the hips, but from the ankles, that's helpful. And then having a quick light cadence. Usually if you're going to land with that foot under your center of mass, the cadence has to be kind of quick and light rather than big lopey strides. If you get lopey strides, usually the foot, goes out in front of the body too much. So there's a few little technical cues that are great, but I would certainly take the recommendation of, this gait analysis you've had and do what they're asking you to do, just see if it makes a difference for sure. What else did you say? Oh, so to help you go faster and avoid running injuries. Yeah. So, faster is one thing and being more efficient is another. And ideally we want both, right? We want to move faster without, it taking much more energy. So if that gives us help. Devin says, beyond fitness and athletics, what helps with triathlons, like pain tolerance, desire to win, etc.? Yeah, for sure. I mean, some people I think have a higher threshold for discomfort. And if you're going to do sport like triathlon, running, biking, anything in the endurance space, you really have to have a high tolerance for discomfort. I think it's trainable. So some people may be more naturally disposed to putting themselves in discomfort and hanging out there. That was one of my strengths for sure. But it's trainable. So with training and with time and with doing hard workouts over and over, we train that part of us. We build up that tolerance. Desire to win for sure. Yeah. I mean, that's a funny one when people throw that out. I think most of us really would like to win rather than not win. Some people, I think, maybe have a different relationship with the competitive side of it. Maybe they really just like to do it because it makes them feel good, or whatever their reason is. Awesome. It's like that's also great. But I also think we have a competitive nature to us, and I think if you asked most people, would you rather win or not win? If they were answered honestly, they probably said rather win. So I think most of us have a desire to win, but what I'll say is I think most people don't have the desire to do what it takes to win. That's the big difference. And that's not to be, mean about anything. The athletes at the highest level in any sport, they all probably have a similar desire to win. It's the willingness to do what it takes to win. That's the big difference. It's a huge difference. I watched Wimbledon, for example, yesterday. The men's and women's final were on the weekend, and I would love to win Wimbledon. That would be amazing, and I did have tennis in my own sporting history, but I think right now well, even back then it's not going to happen. But if you think of what the life of the person that wins that tournament actually looks like, it's maybe not as glamorous as you might think. I mean, they're probably out on the court, 3 to 5 hours a day. They're doing, training outside of that. I mean, it's a full-time job, and they're probably dealing with injuries a lot, and they're tired a lot, and they probably, have lots of things that we might consider sacrifices in order to live that life. In triathlon, it was the same, like the lots of people wanted to win, but not everybody was willing to do the things that to win, which meant really dedicating your entire existence to that one specific goal. So yeah, that's a big part of it. Good question. I like it. What are your thoughts? Jason says, what are your thoughts on manifesting when you practiced while training or just on a daily basis? Would you envision yourself winning a race? Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think you need to be careful. The word manifesting, I don't have a problem with it. I like the idea of it, but really what it comes down to, are you willing to put in the work daily, hourly, weekly, monthly, yearly? Are you willing to just work and work and work for this thing? And in a way, that's manifesting. I think where people get confused is they think they can maybe sit down and just think about it all the time, and that will manifest what they want. I don't believe that at all. You have to really live it. So if manifesting means every day I'm getting up and committing to this goal, then yes, I'm all for manifesting. But if manifesting means I'm going to sit on the couch and think about being great at something, then I disagree with that part of manifesting. I think that's like anybody who's good at anything does the work, and they also think about it. So yes, would I think about winning races all the time while I was doing the work to try and win races? What else was I going to say about that? Oh yeah, the other thing too is, sometimes I don't want my comments to be taken as, only high performance. I mean, if your goal is to get through a sprint triathlon for the very first time, and you're at that stage of your athletic life and journey, the same thing applies. So if you want to finish a sprint triathlon, you have to go do some swimming and biking and running, and to do it consistently for a block of time, and then you'll get there. And while you're doing that, you can also imagine and envision and manifest that idea, through your thoughts, but it also has to come through your actions. I hope makes sense. Oh, Jason says, thanks. Great answer on manifesting. Hard work is the key and consistency, for sure. And that is manifesting. If you are actually doing the work, you are manifesting what you want. But if you just sit on the couch and think about it, it's not going to happen. I don't think. But maybe I don't understand manifesting. Maybe that was part of the problem. No, I'm just kidding. Let's see here. I do love that question, though, because they go hand in hand, right? Like, yes, I'll go back to my Wimbledon analogy. The people, the athletes who are winning that event, yeah, I'm sure from a very young age as kids, they would imagine doing that. Even as a almost 50-year-old adult, when I go play ice hockey, which is my favorite thing to do right now, if I in warm up, if I take a shot and it goes top left-hand corner, there's a tiny part of my brain that's still like, that'd be cool if that was like in overtime in the Stanley Cup finals. Right. So, not that I'm ever going to manifest that, but yes, the imagination part of our brain, envisioning or imagining that we could one day do that, especially as kids, is massive. So yes, do that as well as the physical training. Jason says, when you race, are you trying to breathe out of your nose or mouth? Every time I try and breathe out of my nose, I find it pretty hard. I'm guessing over time it will get better, but what are your thoughts? Yeah, I want to be careful here because I don't necessarily know. And I mean, breathing through your nose is very effective, and it's one way to kind of manage effort, right? Like as effort goes up, inevitably you're gonna need, your demand for oxygen goes up, so you need a bigger entryway for that to get in. But lots of people are, will stick to nose breathing. It's funny you say that. Actually, my son's in bike racing, and somebody told him when he was really young that a good way to kind of make sure you're keeping your effort lower is to breathe through your nose. So he breathes through his nose like all the time, and he's 15 now. And we always joke because we're like, was that effort hard enough that you had to breathe through your mouth this time? Like if he does a race, and he always laughs. He's like, yeah, I had to do some mouth breathing. So at some point, as the effort goes up, you're probably going to need a bigger entryway for air to come in. I can't think of any kind of really high intensity effort that's can be done just through nose breathing. But if you're doing a walk, or maybe you want to practice as an exercise, it's not a bad thing. I think it actually has some tremendous benefits. I'll do a little research and I'll get back to you on that one. Yeah. That's a good question too, though. You stumped me a bit on that one. I feel like I should know more about that, but we used to practice nose breathing to keep intensity low. So we were like, okay, if you're doing, a lower end endurance or recovery ride, you can practice just breathing through the nose, and there's some benefit to that. So, yeah. Thanks, Jason. You bet. This has been great. It looks like we're kind of at the end of our questions here. As always, such great questions. I really appreciate you jumping on here and being thoughtful about what you're asking. And I love that we're getting some different types of question. The manifesting one was great. I went down a bit of a tangent on that, but I think it's a good one to address. So as always, if you want to review this, definitely go to the My Endurance Hub space, the recorded versions that should be up fairly soon. And you can see all the other ones and check out all the other amazing stuff in there, like our master classes and our daily endurance moments and our webinars. Lots of great stuff in there. Thanks again for your time and energy, everybody. And I think that'll be a wrap for today. Have an awesome day, everybody.